Good evening. Welcome to this month's Town Administrators Report. I'm David Watts Jr., and with me is our Town Administrator, Steve Mayo. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having us today.
And we have three guests this month. This is program 3 in a series of 3 on the school system and education this year under COVID-19. Doug Lyons, our superintendent of schools, is joining us once again. And also with him is teacher Jason Pavey.
Yep, hi.
Who is a history teacher in the high school?
Yeah, I'm the 5 through 12 history coordinator, so back and forth between the high school and Galvin.
Cool. And then Zach Atui, who's a senior at Wakefield High.
Hello.
And let's start off with both of you. Zach, as a student, with everything that's been going on since last March, how is school this year? What are your feelings about it? Where do you see things right at this moment?
Well, I'm really happy to be back in the building. Going through the whole roller coaster ride of online learning, as it being so abrupt in March, and no one was expecting it, and it was a really hard transition for a lot of kids. And being back in the building, you get that sense of being comfortable, and that it's just a whole learning environment allows you to be a better student and allows you to learn more. And like I just get this word comfortable. It just keeps popping in my head, and I'm just really happy to be back.
Are the changes in the way the school day and the classrooms themselves, how are they affecting the school experience, the educational experience?
Yeah, so obviously it's not the same. I mean, you only have half the people in small classrooms where you can only go down certain hallways at a certain time, and it's definitely different. It was definitely an adjustment, but it's nothing more than a minor inconvenience because, I mean, at least for me, you still feel the same in a classroom, whether it's 20 people, 10 people, or in my case, when I have Mr. Pavey, it's 8 of us. Right. And you're still able to learn, you're still able to ask questions, bounce off ideas, have that classroom discussion. You're still able to feel like you're in a school and feel like you're getting a proper education and feel like you're comfortable. And, you know, the one-way hallways it was annoying at first because I was trying to go from, let's say I needed to go from a science class to a music class, and they're on opposite ends, and I got to figure out where I got to go, and oh, oops, I walked down the wrong hallway. But I mean, anything, like I said, it's not anything beyond a minor inconvenience.
And Jason, how has this year changed the teaching experience from your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, it's good to be back in the building for sure. We had that phase 1 where it was remote, and then kind of even going back to the spring when it was fully remote. I think, you know, my experience, and then, you know, the people that I work with, kind of to piggyback off what Zach said, those, you know, the in-person stuff, it's those minor inconveniences of having to be 6 feet apart, and you know, obviously like wearing masks, you're not necessarily able to like do traditional group work, but teachers just feel so much more comfortable and confident, I think, in their practice when they're in person. Mm-hmm. I think no matter what teachers say, no matter how tech savvy they are, I think the one area that has been like the biggest struggle across the board is like the online piece. Like it's just not natural. You know, we had class this morning, and you know, we're teaching a diversity class, and it's just really tough to have those conversations over a Zoom. So I think that's just because we're all really new to that type of teaching. But you know, like I said, I'm super proud of like the people that I work with and how much time they've dedicated to trying to really adjust their practice on the fly. So it's going as well as it could go, I would say, given the circumstances.
And how have teachers adjusted to this so-called new normal? Because sure. I know that teachers over the summer and coming up to the opening of school in September were expressing very, very serious concerns about how things were being planned, how things were being put together. Obviously the experience at the high school is probably different from the experience in the middle school or the elementary schools. But have any of those concerns or fears stayed with teachers, or have they, for the most part, been resolved?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be the uncertainty just because of the lack of experience. This is all like uncharted territory for everybody. And I think, the general kind of concern for teachers is, we're all planners, right? And it's really hard to plan units, plan chapters, plan terms like we traditionally do when we're really, some of us are just going week to week. So there's that uncertainty from like the planning standpoint. Like, I think a lot of it might be some undue stress, like teachers feeling the need they have to get through content and curriculum like they traditionally did, when we're trying to be really clear that this is not a traditional normal year. But I think some of the other fears that were maybe people might have had going into the year was really just the fact of not actually being in the building. And I think, once you're in the building and you kind of get used to the protocols and you see all of the precautions, I think, that were kind of taken as far as like moving the desks, and we joke around, but like the high school looks like a game of like chutes and ladders with like all the arrows going this way and that way and stuff like that. And I think kind of once you just get into it, you just people kind of I think we underestimate people's ability to adapt. And I think it's only been 5 weeks, but I think the teachers have made a really, really, a lot of strides as far as like adapting to this environment. So I think part of it was just the fear of the unknown, like not knowing what the building would look like,
Right.
not knowing how kids would react. And it's like, when you have kids in front of you, you have kids in front of you. And it just becomes like almost that you just kind of like trust your natural like teaching instincts when you're in the class.
So somehow it has kind of settled out a little bit. And how much of the curriculum that was covered, say, a year ago is even possible now under this hybrid system that the school system has been under?
Yeah, so I mean, for the last couple of years, we've talked a lot about, looking at standards, looking at curriculum frameworks, and kind of, I teach history, so it's like I always joke around, it's the only subject where they keep adding more standards, right? Every year there's more, so we keep having more and more to cover.
There's more history every year, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
So that's
yeah.
it. There's more every year.
And it doesn't fall off at the other
No,
end.
so it's like our department, we've always struggled with like, well, what's the priority? Like, what are the, meeting as a department, and these are like the priority standards is what we would call them. And now it's like, this year we have to almost prioritize the priority standards. Like, like what is like, we just have to come to grips with the fact that there's gonna be some content that's gonna be on the cutting room floor this year, because of, it's just like schedule wise, like the hours. Like if you just do the math, the hours aren't the same as they have been in the past.
Right.
That face-to-face time that you have with students is. And so it's kind of like, what's the priority, but also what lessons are best taught when we do have that in-person time, because that's like so valuable. And then what are some other things that not necessarily can be like pushed aside to synchronous or like asynchronous online, but what could maybe, what can kids do maybe on their own? So I think we're kind of like, more so than ever, needing to collaborate as departments, as teams, just to kind of, where are you? How's it going? Making sure that we're all kind of like somewhat in the same direction, but also, again, just trying to like alleviate the stress of you're not going to get through what you normally get through, and that's going to be okay, right? So it's just a constant, the constant communication is what's going to really
Right.
kind of get us through. However long this takes,
Right. Which also brings up, Doug, the question of, if they aren't able to cover what they have covered previously under the traditional system, how is this going to affect our children down the road? Do we even have an idea of that right now?
Well, I mean, that conversation is actively happening at the state level, at the Department of Education. And it's happening, I think, with curriculum leaders throughout the state in every district, right? And so I think one of the things that we're looking at is, the time that transpired for the second half of the school year last year in regard to time, what were we able to get in, what opportunities did we miss, and now that we're back, we're just trying to get some time and a schedule so that we can start to predict with some reliability how much we're going to be able to teach, and also what adjustments that we're going to be able to make. And so one of the things that I think is helping that conversation is, and Jason referred to this, is what are the priority standards, right? What do students absolutely need in regard to priority standards? If there are 36 standards in a given year, and we're not going to be able to cover all 36, let's say we're able to get to 22, right? Of the 36, what are the priority 22? How are we going to cover them? When are we going to teach them? What is the best way to do this? What are the best times to do this? Is it best to teach this remotely? Is it best to teach this in person? And Jason actually used a really great phrase that I think we use quite often now, which is control the controllables, right? And so this is, in the current plan that we're in, that we're starting to think about kind of some consistency and predictability. We're also kind of in a parallel to this are thinking about what happens if we have to shift to a full remote plan because of the uptick in the transmission of the virus. And so we have kind of a plan A, priority standards, and in the hybrid plan that we're in the times that we're able to meet. And then we're working on a plan B and a plan C, which will kind of be, which will adapt from there, just based on the time that we have an opportunity to work with kids. And so that's how we're managing the situation. But it's certainly less than ideal. But if the cup is half full and we're trying to take a positive perspective and mindset, which is everyone's in the same boat, right? And the question is, how do we make good with what we have, right? It's like the old, you get lemons, you make lemonade, right? And so that's where we are at. Is that pretty close, you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, the other thing about like those priority standards is, from a history standpoint, it's, we always say like it's not always about the content, like the actual historical event that we're trying to teach. It's more like skill development. So making sure that for us, like those priority standards are like, what are the necessary skills ninth grader needs to move on to become a 10th grader? Not necessarily did they get through all of world history and know every single event. So it's the interesting thing, we've been talking about this as a district for the last couple of years as part of like our professional development, is like skills over content. And now, kind of like the silver lining to this whole pandemic is like, it's now we actually have to do it. Like before it was like, oh, we can try it and we'll see. But now it's like we actually are going to be forced to prioritize these things and make skills important and have these meetings because of the schedule and the situation that we're in. So I would say we're prepared for this. We've actually had some training on it. It's just now it's like we got to kind of put our foot to the pedal and do it.
Well, and all of this discussion brings up, there was an article from CNN last week, schools are 2 months into reopening under COVID-19 and no one's keeping track of how it's going. And the opening, a 6-year-old afraid to go outside, a mom scared to send her children back to school, then thrilled at how they've thrived, a teacher worried she'll be ordered back to the classroom and become some kind of test subject. This is kind of what I alluded to earlier. These are some of the stress stories of the pandemic hit school year so far, but it's impossible to know how widespread the experiences are because there is no national tracking of what happens when children and staff return to schools. And without that tracking, health and education experts say there's no way to come up with best practices to restart schools, educate children most effectively, and open up their parents to commit to their work lives. In essence, every community and every superintendent of schools, every teacher is reinventing the wheel on their own. And, you know,
I don't know if it's on our own.
Right.
I don't think it's on our own. And so we can't do this work alone, and we can't do it in isolation.
yeah,
I think, one of the things are the new normal for us is, and I know Steve is in the same space, where we're doing, 6 to 10 hours of Zoom meetings a day. And the people that we're meeting with are other people that are wrestling with these same type of questions. We're talking to district superintendents. Jason is working with curriculum coordinators, right? And the curriculum coordinators are working with departments of teachers. He's working with the history department here at the high school, and at the middle school, he's working with teams of teachers, right? And, and then we're trying to deliver to our students, to Zach, and kind of that's our feedback loop, right? Is, how are our students, how are they acclimating, right? And so one of the telltales we're looking at is what skills are they developing, how are they achieving, but also we're looking at their wellness, right? We're looking at and wondering about and asking questions of one another. Who's participating on hybrid days in person? Who's participating in remote settings? What does it look like? How are we reaching out? So we're doing our work differently, but the work is still the same, right? And so we're just needing to adapt to understand that we just need to kind of figure out how to just do it differently. The content hasn't changed, expectations haven't changed. Zach, I'm sure, is looking at schools and colleges, like he would as if we were here 5 days a week. And our job is to prepare him, give him the skills and the best opportunity to go off and be successful. But that's I think where we're at.
And I think when you looked at this, I mean, there's no playbook for this, right?
Right.
We had no best practices. We kind of figured that out as we're all going along. And in March, when we had to close things down for a lot of reasons, I think that initially, Doug and I talked, and we're gonna close the school Friday for a cleaning. That's been a pretty long cleaning because that went for like 6 months. But and that's what happened. But so we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know when we opened up town hall to the public. We didn't know when we opened up the playgrounds a little bit more. We didn't know what was going to happen when school opened up. But if I sit and I did, what do they call it, a word cloud? And I sit and discuss, showing how hip I am with the young ones. If you say hip, you're not hip, right?
yeah, it's already passé.
It's already passé, yeah. If you talk about the words that we talked about today, and when Zach started, comfortable, feels comfortable. What a great word to have in there. It's not the same, I get that. Minor inconvenience. I heard happiness. Still able to learn, bounce off ideas. What wonderful things to hear that our students are talking about. One of our premier teachers, good to be back in the building. What a great thing to hear. Good to be back in the building. Proud of all the work you've been doing. Building again. Prioritizing what we can do. Collaborating. There's a lot of value to be there. Less than ideal. I get that. We all know it's less than ideal. But for me, sitting here, I think this is as good as we could have expected. Has it been inconvenient for people? I get it. Has it been tough for two-income families? I get it. Are there people that are a little bit more compromised, that are fearful? I get it. I get all of that. So we really didn't know, and Doug and I talk about this all the time. We're kind of, in the same boat, rowing the oars, really not knowing, what's going to hit us around the corner. But I am thrilled with what I'm hearing today, that it has worked, and I'm thrilled with the collaboration we've had. And in a very weird way, and this is very strange, although we are, I would say, more alone, we're not necessarily more lonely, because we are collaborating with people that maybe we wouldn't have if we had to drive to Swampscott to go to a meeting. It's pretty easy now to have a meeting on our Zoom, on our computer, as much as we hate them. I mean, because of that. So for me, I think this couldn't have gone better. And maybe Doug wants to talk a little bit about the work that we did together with his staff and our staff to make sure that you were happy and comfortable in those buildings. It was a lot of work, so maybe you want to touch on that a little bit, because we kind of talked about that last time.
Sure. I think we touched on this in some of our last meetings. We've done kind of a soup to nuts engineering survey of our schools. We've looked at our mechanical systems and our HVAC systems. We also, I think I shared in our last meeting that our DPW here in Wakefield is one of the few DPWs in the area that actually has an HVAC tech on the payroll, right? So he is kind of working with our maintenance people and our custodians.
Two of them.
And right.
Yeah.
And it has been really, that has helped us get things in a space, or get things in an operable space and in a maintenance space where we feel pretty good about where we are in terms of our buildings being safe. Now I need to qualify that statement with the very clear understanding that, we're working with a high school that we're kind of in the chute to hopefully knock down and renew, or something like that, right? And so, but our other kind of facilities, we've gone through them, we've collaborated, and Steve's point is really the most important takeaway as I listen to Steve talk is the collaborative, the relational capital and the collaboration that's happening now is very different than it was a year ago, because people have been pushed together to have to problem solve, figure things out, and get schools open and get them operating at a level that we haven't had to have them operating at in years past. And we've been able to do that successfully. And there are new problems that we face every day, every week. We're working very closely now with the Board of Health and trying to contact trace and understand what this virus is looking like in regard to what the transmissions looks like, and where is it happening, and is it affecting our students, and if it is affecting our students, what does our response need to be to continue to keep people safe. But that's a large part of what we're doing every day, and what our students don't see that, right? But our students come into school and they go to their classes, and I love to hear you say that word comfortable as well, Zach. And I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your schedule, just in regard to what it's like and what your classes are like.
Yeah, so I go to school, I'm in Cohort A, so I go to school Monday and Tuesday. Monday, I'll show up 7:30. I usually park right in the back lot, and I'll walk in. And I have Mr. Pavey's class first, so I'll go in there, and it's interesting because you walk in, doors are already open, hand sanitizer bottles are legit everywhere, wipes everywhere, you gotta follow the arrows like the Chutes and Ladders maze. You get into class, and you don't, like now it's been a few weeks, you really don't think of it anymore. Like at first it was like, oh, this is weird. Oh, wow, they're taking it really seriously, like with all the arrows and the hand sanitizer bottles and all that stuff. But like the second you sit in your seat and the lesson starts, it's kind of just like school. Like obviously you know what's going on around you. You have the mask on. All the desks are 6 feet apart with a little red dot on the floor to make sure that they're all equally separated. But you feel like it's school, and then you move on to your next class. And I only have 3 classes Monday and 3 classes on Tuesday, which is the most significant downside, because 80 minutes of in-person learning, like Mr. Pavey was saying earlier with the curriculum, isn't enough to teach what they were teaching all of last year. So that's annoying, because obviously you're not getting the full experience. But other parts of my schedule would be just like walking through the hallways. I'm assuming that's what a lot of people are thinking about. They're like, oh, it's a high school, how can you keep socially distanced in a high school when you're walking through hallways? So, like, you can, and with the arrows on the floor, and you can just try to make sure that you are separated, and it does work. So
Zach, in regard to learning outside of this in-person days,
yeah,
can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think now it's easier for all of us because we've had 6 months of doing it from, March, April, May, June, and then the beginning of phase 1. It's still hard. I mean, there's a connection. I always tell this to teachers, like there's a connection that you miss because you're not in person. Like if we were having this meeting over Zoom right now, it'll feel, just the feeling is different. Mm-hmm. It's definitely, it's it's especially for certain subjects. Maybe it's just me, but like when I'm in my math class, it's a lot harder for me to engage and get a total understanding of the lesson. I need to work harder. The teacher needs to work harder. I might have to email the teacher after the Zoom meeting and be like, I didn't understand when you were talking about X or whatever. Maybe in a regular classroom, you wouldn't have to do that. But I feel like if students take the extra step into making sure that they understand it versus there are those kids who might just blow it off and it's just like whatever. But you have to work a little harder, and obviously it's a little different and a little uncomfortable, and maybe you're a little awkward raising your hand, and maybe you don't want to like unmute yourself and talk, but it's for a discounted version of learning is pretty good.
Well, and
Interesting.
that's the term that, at least for myself, bothers me the most is discounted learning. You know, I understand with the pandemic and everything, things have to change, but at some point, this is going to catch up with us. This is going to catch up with us. And the ones that I worry about the most are the elementary kids who aren't getting the foundational support that they need to be able to be successful when they get to middle school and when they get to high school and when they get to college. And that's the thing that is most fearsome, is that we're going to have a whole block of kids that never will be ready because this whole thing is kind of a lab rat situation. And yes, it came upon us very quickly. It was, you know, nobody saw it coming in quite the way it did. But at the same time, sometimes there have been thoughts in the past of how we would deal with situations like this, and it just never really got taken seriously. Now, everybody has to. So how are we going to move forward with the younger kids, for instance, the kids who are in K through 4? Before they get to the middle school, because the whole thing changes once you get to middle school.
It does. It does. And so our elementary hybrid schedule, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but we have in-person learning 4 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
So different than Zach's schedule, where Zach said he's in a Cohort A, which he's in Monday, Tuesday. He's learning remotely Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Yeah.
Right? And then he's back in Monday, Tuesday. We have the same type of schedule where we call it a 2-1-2. Monday, Tuesday in, 1 day synchronous learning, 2 days back in.
Mm-hmm.
And so from 5-12, we're in a 2-1-2 model. And so hybrid learning, right, is essentially taking half of the students and putting them into school for half the amount of time. Right? I shared this with you at the last meeting. When we were discussing this. And so some districts are cutting that time 1 week on, 1 week off. We looked at that model. We thought that there was just too much of a gap in time for students to be away from us. We don't know what they would be doing, so we thought we needed to have them in every week.
Right.
And when we looked at the elementary programs and options, we created, I think, the only hybrid program like it in the surrounding area, with kids being in 4 days a week. And the reason that we have students in 4 days a week for half the day is because, and we have a morning cohort and an afternoon cohort. And so, like Zach's schedule, Wednesday is still a synchronous day, but they're in Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, Friday. That's all kids, right? And some kids are in the morning cohort, and some kids are in the afternoon.
Right.
And the reason that they're in is with the continuity and as much as they are is because we thought that maximized FaceTime, our time spent with our students without interruption.
Mm-hmm.
Now we prioritized subjects, and there's also a remote learning component that students are doing outside of school. But first of all, I think it's important to know, and I feel like I can't communicate it enough, that our plan alone, I think, sets us up to be, I think, as good as we can be under the circumstances, number one. Number two, we're looking at this broadly in regard to how can we create additional opportunities over time, over the next 18 to 36 months, right? What happens post-COVID? What other learning opportunities can we create to support students? What other ways can we create interventions to support students, not only during the school day, but outside of the school day? So those are things that we're actively looking at to address any learning loss or supports that students need. We're also anticipating that there's going to be kind of an uptick in social emotional needs, as well as special education services that we're also looking at on a continuum of between 18 and 36 months, right? But this all falls in line with a lot of the emergency management and kind of the emergency response that we've been talking about at a leadership level with Steve in regard to kind of prioritizing our budgets, looking at, not just this fiscal year, but looking at the next 3 fiscal years, right? We want to make moves and decisions that we can build off of, and grow in a footprint that we can continue to prioritize and provide services for our students. But we're talking a lot about our elementary kids and how we can support them. But with all of that said, and you've asked this question probably 4 different ways, if not 5 different ways, which is this notion of us being in a different time. We don't know the ramifications or how things are going to transpire long term. We don't, right? But Wakefield, Massachusetts, and our country is all in the same space, right? And so, Massachusetts pre-COVID was number 1 in the country in regard to education, right? That's based on the NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. That's completely independent of any state assessments, right? This is a national assessment. And when they rank order states, Massachusetts tested kind of number 1 in the country, right? So we have had a progressive system, and I would argue we still have a progressive system. We haven't stopped, and expectations around being progressive and around being aggressive about doing everything that we can for our students. I mean, the expectations that Zach's parents have from us and other parents in the community haven't lessened. I would argue they've gone up, right? And I would argue they've gone up. And to hear Zach say, I never thought I'd hear myself say this, but I'm happy to be back, right? Yeah, we're happy to have you back, right? And so that's just kind of a quick. But one thing that I think can't get lost in this conversation is we're all in the same place. We're in a national health crisis, and everyone's trying to make sense of this. And I got to tell you, I really think, professionally, in regard to my work and our commitment to the community, I think we're going to be okay. And I think we're going to work through this, and we're going to address learning loss. We're going to address what students need. We're going to address what families need. We've done it very thoughtfully so far, and that's not going to change.
I agree, and I think that the way the schedules were tweaked was very thoughtful. There was a lot of discussion about that, and there was the emphasis put on in-person time, for lack of a better word, for some of the younger kids. I think that was great, and I think that we're talking about. Let's not focus on what we left on the cutting room floor. Let's focus on. Kids learned a lot of other things. Students learned a lot of other things. Their adults have learned a lot of other things. How to maneuver in a different world, how to get information via the internet that younger kids didn't know, how to manage themselves through these issues. So I think I'm sent to be positive anyway. I think there's going to be a positiveness at the end of this too. So I'm happy, and I'm really thrilled the way this has gone. And every day is a good day that the kids are in school. So
we actually
thank you.
said in Zach's class yesterday, they're all seniors, that the silver lining is this is kind of like getting you ready for what a college schedule might look like.
Exactly.
Where you go to school till 12 and then you don't see that teacher again for 4 or 5 days.
Right.
So those time management skills where, you're you're practicing them for free right now, as opposed to your parents spending $20,000 next year for you to learn the hard way. But yeah, so it's like it's a little different for seniors than elementary kids, but it's still like, you know, they're getting, like you said, like those skills that
Right.
maybe a year ago we weren't necessarily emphasizing.
Well, and the other aspect of elementary are the kids who, for one reason or another, have to be totally remote and have no school experience. And what's the best way that they and their parents can monitor their progress? Is that being monitored in the same way?
It's being monitored in the exact same way.
Yeah.
And so our remote, full remote students, we have about 350 in grades K through 12, right? At the elementary level, the remote parents have kind of a community that they're creating for themselves. We have a principal or two administrators, Tiffany Back, who's the Greenwood principal, and Tom Bankert, who's the high school director of fine and performing arts. They're the two administrators that are leading the remote cohort in addition to all of their other duties. So it's like having a principal and assistant principal that are running that group. Parents have developed their own mascot for the group. And the teachers that are working in our remote plan are also our Wakefield Public School teachers, right? And so we've promoted a number of people, and people that were who couldn't come back for any number of reasons. We've
Who
offered
couldn't
them,
come back physically.
Yeah. We've offered them positions in the full remote program, and they have accepted, and it's working out really as well as it can. And so they're thinking about ways to keep our students connected socially. So I think the teachers in that space and the administrators that are running that program, I think it's really being done well. You know, I think it's interesting because there's less interruption than the hybrid. So where you're on and you're off, like you know what your schedule is every day, every week. So it's actually a little bit easier on those students because they know what their schedule is, what time I need to be on Zoom, how much time I'm going to be here, what are the requirements, you know, how am I going to get extra help if I need it, or how am I going to get reading services if I need it. And so there's, I would argue in some ways there's kind of the missing piece of the social interaction, which is what you talked about, because this feels pretty good, especially when you don't have it for a little while. But I think we're chipping away there. You know, there's always room in everything that we're doing every day. There's always room for improvement, but it's a pretty good group, you know. And like I said, the parents we had a Zoom call a little over a week ago, and I was a little shocked to hear they have their own mascot, they have their own group. It's like a school system within a school system. It's quite good.
Not unlike Greenwood School and its mascot.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
If parents have any concerns or don't feel as though they're getting or their child is getting the attention that he or she needs, what's their best way to make sure those things happen?
I think the best thing to do is to always reach out to the teacher first, just to touch base. You know, our teachers are working really hard, and our teachers are really, I would argue, honest to a fault, right? They're gonna tell you, this is what we know, this is what I would recommend that you do, and I think that they're gonna give it to you pretty straight. I think if you're unable to get through to a teacher, then you can certainly reach out to your child's principal, and of course, you know, we always welcome feedback from them, but it's the type of thing where if it is in regard to a situation that's happening in the classroom, it's hard for us to weigh in thoughtfully and contribute thoughtfully to that conversation without having the firsthand information. So normally we would direct them back to the teacher, or and you know, then go back ourselves to try to construct a solution if it's a problem that needs to be solved. And we that's what I would recommend.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Steve, a couple of closing thoughts. We have regular town meeting coming up.
Yeah, we have regular town meeting Saturday, November 7th, 8 a.m. At the Field House. It'll be the same structure and same setup basically as we did for the June town meeting, except instead of having air conditioning being pumped into the Field House, we're going to have heat pumped out into the tents outside for people that are more comfortable. Masks are required, as any places are. There will be an area, however, for people that have a medical condition and can't wear a mask. There are 11 articles.
That will be the outside tent
No,
primarily.
outside tent, but there will be an inside area too.
Oh, okay.
We have 11 articles. First one is the annual town report from last year, which is interesting to me because I write it, but it kind of shows a tale of almost 2 years. A year when we were, the economy was booming, these things were happening, and then it fell off the edge on March 15th or March 17th, whatever that was. And we will be using some free cash to balance the budget. That was projected, a little bit more than we had projected, but we're still in good shape. Probably the most exciting article, the superintendent alluded to it, is to get to the end of Modular 1 in a new or a new high school or an addition renovation high school, whatever we come up with, and that's what we're here to look at. We're here to look at a feasibility study to get to the schematic design that the school building authority will get into. I believe that's Article 3 at the town meeting, and so that should bring some interest. But that's nice that we're on the state list, looking for 50% reimbursement. And I always say, people, think about if you were going to be adding on your house and someone was going to match you dollar for dollar. It's kind of a nice problem to have. A couple of zoning articles, a few general bylaws with an environmental slant, and a settlement, hopefully a settlement of a lawsuit for alleged environmental contamination caused by the town. So I think it'll be much quicker and much cooler anyway than the town meeting in June. But we do encourage people to come out and have their voice heard.
Absolutely. This is your opportunity to participate in the governing of the town directly.
Right.
The other thing to remember is we're coming up on November 3rd. Everyone,
Yep.
whoever you're supporting, get out and vote. It's important. It is vital. Get out and have your say. People right now can go to town hall and vote early.
Yeah, we over the first 2 days, we probably had 1,000 people vote in person early at town hall. Or you could vote by mail. If you're uncomfortable mailing the ballot back, you can go to town hall. We do have a designated metal bolted down mailbox that is clearly marked, ballots, and only the town clerk has the key. So if you don't want to stand in line, you don't want to put it in the mail, you can pop there and pop it in. And there really is no excuse not to vote.
No, absolutely not. This is your chance to have a say. Get out there, vote. Vote for whoever you believe in, but vote. That's the important thing. Thank you
Thank
for
you very much.
joining us.
You got it.
Thank you for joining us this month. We'll see you in November.